So I recently started and finished watching the show Dexter for the very first time. It was always a show that was on my radar. I heard a lot of good things over the years, but also a lot of bad things as well, especially in regards to the show's ending. And when you hear so many bad things about the endings of shows, it's kind of hard to even give them a shot, knowing that no matter what, in the end, you're gonna be disappointed. But with the addition of New Blood, Original Sin, and yet another spinoff, Resurrection, this universe is starting to look like The Walking Dead. But it also meant that the ending, or endings, could be reversed. So I started watching it with the intention of not making a video on it. I feel like 90% of the stuff that I watch nowadays is for a video. Now, it's not me complaining, but I kind of wanted to watch something I had no intention of making a video on. Something I didn't have to take notes on, something that doesn't typically fit into the fantasy, sci-fi, horror niche that my channel covers. But of course, with Dexter's growing popularity, this being a topic that many people have asked me to cover, and this show having quite a few horrific moments in it, I figured it still fits, and here we are. Like I said, Dexter was always a show that I had on my watch list. I had seen a few snippets of the show here and there, namely this moment.
Surprise, motherfucker!
But I just never had the itch to watch it up until recently. I'm a big believer that stories come into your life when you need them to. Once upon a time, I tried watching Friday Night Lights, couldn't really get into it, only to give it another shot and have it become one of my favorite shows of all time. I tried playing The Last of Us Part 2 when it came out, wasn't for me, but then I played it years later when I was going through a rough time in my life, and it became one of my favorite stories of all time. I guess I'm just saying I believe that I watched Dexter now in order to make this video. Or, maybe not, and that's just my sentimental and pretentious side coming out a little bit. So I've retroactively gone through each season, taking notes on everything that I liked, didn't like, and will even rank all the seasons at the end of the video, including New Blood and Original Sin. But because I didn't take notes while I was watching the show in the first place, if my memory of some things is a bit spotty, I apologize, but here we go. This video is going to have full spoilers for the entire series of Dexter, Dexter New Blood, and Dexter Original Sin, so let's talk the highs and lows of the Dexter franchise. So for those that don't know, haven't seen Dexter, and have avoided my spoiler warning, Dexter follows Dexter Morgan, a blood analyst for Miami Metro Homicide Division, and the show goes through many different cases of murders that happen around this area, and the team that works together to solve these mysteries and catch the killer. Sounds like a pretty good idea, right? Well, sure, but it also just sounds like if Criminal Minds or NCIS or any of those other cop procedural shows took place in Miami. So this show adds another element that just, ever so slightly changes things up a bit. And that's the fact that Dexter Morgan is a serial killer himself, often killing the people for these murders because the law would more often than not either not end up catching the killer or couldn't put them away for life. Dexter does this because as a kid, his dad saw signs of Dexter going down a darker path, saying that Dexter has himself a dark passenger. So Harry, Dexter's adoptive father, who also worked at Miami Metro, decided to teach Dexter to kill people who really deserve to be killed. The perfect alternative for, doing child therapy. Dexter is based on a series of books by Jeff Lindsay, although I'd say that this is as loose of an adaptation as the Vampire Diaries books were to that show, so it was more so of just a guide. In fact, if things had been adapted more accurately, this show would definitely fit within the horror fantasy stuff that I cover on the channel, considering Dexter's dark passenger in the books is a demon. The first season follows Dexter on the case of the ice truck killer, someone who drains the blood of victims and freezes their bodies before putting them on display for Miami Metro, and more specifically, Dexter to find. So the first thing that really stuck out to me with the show were all the side characters, specifically how important each of them were. I really went into this show thinking it was solely gonna follow around Dexter, and while 70% of the time it does, that other 30% was a welcome surprise, because it did make this feel more like an ensemble show, and I didn't really expect that. They each have their own storylines and development that have absolutely nothing to do with Dexter or his storyline whatsoever. It took me a few episodes to actually start caring about all these side characters: Deb, LaGuerta, Batista, Vince, and even Rita. After watching through all the seasons and even just writing this down and saying it out loud now, it sounds insane that there was once a time in my life where I didn't care for La Passion, but I think it was because everything the side characters were going through was so disconnected from Dexter's story. But I eventually came around, and I really liked all the side characters and their stories, particularly La Passion. After watching through all the seasons, this is really the only season that is a true and through mystery. I'm a big fan of stories that use an audience surrogate, aka knowing what the character knows and learning the story along with them. And that's exactly what this season does, for like 70% of the season. We're right there along with Dexter learning more about the ice truck killer. We have different suspects in our minds until we get to tick them off safe one by one, but then somewhere around 3/4 of the way through the season, we learn that Rudy is the killer. But this works because it continues to add suspense to their conversations, and there's the additional reveal that Rudy is Dexter's biological brother at the end of the season. I think this is a big reason why the story of this season works far better than most of the other seasons. Every other season of this show uses dramatic irony, aka when the audience knows more than the characters. This is a particular problem in season 5, but I'll get there eventually. Of course, a big part of the show is Dexter being a serial killer. The overall premise is incredible, but it's also super risky. Hindsight is 2020, so of course we know how it went, but I truly feel like this must have been a really hard sell to Showtime and really risky because you still need to make Dexter likable enough and have the audience root for him, while knowing what he's doing isn't exactly all that great, or should I say legal. The show plays around with this in a few clever ways. For one, we never really get to see a supremely graphic Dexter kill. Sure, the people he kills aren't great people whatsoever, so seeing them meet their justice is great, but if it got too graphic, I feel like that could be a bit too much for some viewers and have us think of Dexter as a truly sick and twisted individual. We get to see the hunt, the research, the actual kidnapping, the table, the stab, and the cleanup, but never anything too severe, which is a stark contrast to how we see the victims of the ice truck killer in this season, and really all the other villains in every subsequent season. I said hindsight is 2020, and it is, but I feel like the reveal of Rudy as Dexter's brother was almost too early. I feel like this could have been even more powerful if it was 2 or 3 seasons on, but again, if this was only a 1-season show, it would have been great. But as it stands, it just seems like this season has so much more weight behind it than most of the other seasons. Especially when this sorta close-to-home story is attempted again in the final season, and I'm sure we all know it doesn't quite stick the landing there at all. So this first season gets a 9 out of 10 rating. Excellent starting place for this series, and a great start to a character that has become one of my all-time favorite characters in all of storytelling, Deb. So if you're still one of the people watching this video that has never seen Dexter, you might be wondering where Dexter stores the bodies of his victims. And that's a very great question. He just drives out in the middle of the ocean and dumps them. Problem solved, no need to worry. Oh dear God. So season 2 follows Dexter in deep doo-doo, because now that dozens of bodies have been uncovered, the big boys stroll into town looking to catch one of the most prolific serial killers of all time, who just might be working right under their noses this whole time. Now, this was the season that I actually really started liking the side characters, particularly Deb and Rita. Deb has gone on to become one of my all-time favorite characters, I wasn't joking about that, right along with Dexter, and this season really addresses both of their issues in strange ways. Dexter looks at Lila as a sort of strange mother figure, and Deb, of course, looks at Lundy as a strange father figure. Both of these characters have insane amounts of trauma for different reasons, and that's on full display with their partner choices in this season. The flashbacks with Harry are also really great, especially when we see all the great CGI involved in making Dexter look younger. I mean, for 2006, this is incredible. And the Dexter-Harry dynamic is super unique among all stories. I joked earlier about how Harry should have just gotten Dexter therapy, and well, yeah, he probably should have tried that. This is a story. We see that Harry himself is a deeply flawed man and maybe didn't always make the best choices. Maybe there was a way to stop the Dark Passenger at a young age, but what are we complaining about here? If that happened, there's literally no story at all. Throughout these first couple seasons, we see every single important moment between Harry and Dexter, and yet we got to see it all again in Original Sin, with more context added, sure, but it was a bit strange for this to be here, just for them to do it all again. Why would they even do that? Oh, right, never mind. The story of this season is one of my favorites across all the seasons. Having the Bay Harbor Butcher be looked at as this strange sort of Batman that seems entirely plausible given the recent events of the world, and quite honestly, if Dexter was real, I'd be fine with that, because I know I'd be safe. If you'd be worried about a real Dexter, well, you might want to take a good look into the mirror and wonder why that is. As Lundy starts narrowing things down and all the events and stars line up to reveal it's somebody from Miami Metro, you really start to wonder how and if Dexter is going to get out of all this. This season still uses situational irony because we know what Dexter knows, it's just that none of the other characters know what we know and what Dexter knows. You know?
You don't know that we know they know we know.
So Dexter does find a way out of this, and that's with Dokes, probably the smartest man at Miami Metro, too smart for his own good, clearly, and unfortunately so. I actually think it would have been better for this season if Dokes found Dexter sooner and then he kept him locked away even longer, just because those scenes between them in the back half of this season are some of the best scenes in the series, and I would have liked to see more of them. It's really the first time these two characters, who are at completely opposite ends of the spectrum, find common ground and even some similarities between them. It's also through Dokes' perspective that we start to see, oh right, Dexter is a cold and calculating monster, to the point that we still kind of root for Dokes' death so that way Dexter can continue on. Lila is a new character in this season, probably the most frustrating character that I've seen in a really long time, but for all the best reasons. She's able to manipulate Dexter in a way that he and even the audience don't realize for quite a while, but then when Dexter realizes who she is, what she's done, and how she tries to interfere in his life in so many different ways, she just pushes all the right aggravating buttons to the point she eventually meets Dexter's code. Although I think she fit the audience's code from the minute he chose Lila over Rita. It was also this season that I realized the only times we see Dexter being his true self are when he's at the kill table and when he's around Rita's kids. Dexter when he's about to kill and Dexter every other time are two totally different characters. When he's about to kill, he's really energetic and witty and humorous, whereas every other time he's just trying his hardest to blend in with everybody else. He's super awkward and tense, but this is released when he's around Rita's kids. Dexter truly cares for Rita, but he especially cares about the kids because he wants to give them the childhood he never really had. And that's a supremely important aspect of his character. As time goes on, as these kids get older, as more things start to happen, this side of Dexter slowly dies along with everything that happens. I honestly didn't expect for Dokes to die in this season. I honestly thought that Dexter was going to somehow pin all of the killings and everything on Lila and it would have put her away forever, but I didn't really know how Dokes and Dexter were going to coexist. I thought that maybe that's what the third season would be about, them teaming up in some strange fashion, but I also thought that would kind of go against Dokes' character, so him dying was really Dexter's only way out of this. It really leaves the season off in a strange place. On one hand, we start to view Dexter a bit differently, but we're also rooting for him to go to France and kill Lila. But it's certain that Dexter changed a bit through Dokes' death, whether inadvertently or advertently, but more on that in a little bit. I'm gonna give season 2 of Dexter an 8.8 out of 10, another solid outing for the series. So I know everybody says that seasons 1 to 4 reigns supreme in this series, so I'm gonna say something that might be a little bit controversial, but I don't really think season 3 is that strong of a season. While there are some flashes of greatness, this is personally one of the weaker seasons of the show in my opinion. The premise of the season is actually pretty great. Dexter accidentally kills somebody that's against his code, so he might actually feel some guilt, tries to make up for it, to the guy's brother, Miguel Prado. And it just so happens that Dexter finally finds a friend and somebody to confide his true self to, but as Ghost Harry mentions in this season quite a bit, he can never be his true self around anybody that isn't on the table, because Dexter is a freaky freak that nobody would ever or could ever love. But this Miguel and Dexter friendship is really captivating in the first few episodes. It also goes in some different directions than I thought it would, like I didn't think they would have any sort of friendship whatsoever. I thought Dexter would use this guy for all he's worth, and that would be that. But actual friendship and honesty offers up some new avenues for Dexter, for opening up to somebody and trusting them, but personally, I just never really believed it. I knew at some point all of this was going to go wrong, it wasn't going to sustain, and they would be at odds by the end of the season, and lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. I also find it weird that Rita becomes super close with Miguel's wife, just for her to never be mentioned again after this season. And having the entire story being built by some robbery gone wrong kind of pales in comparison to the stories of the last 2 seasons, with 2 notorious serial killers and a manhunt for both of them. The season is different, I'll give them that, but just overall not my cup of tea. With Dokes gone, there was a spot to fill in the ensemble cast, and this was filled by Joey Quinn, a somewhat crooked cop who's also charming and good-looking. I wonder where all of this could be going. Oh, right, of course this is where it's going. I knew as soon as Detective Quinn was introduced that he would be Deb's long-term love interest. But he's also quite an interesting character, for a little while at least. While he's obviously the replacement for Dokes, being suspicious of Dexter and everything, I like the angle of him being a dirty cop. This offers up some unique circumstances and storylines down the road, and also separates him from who Dokes was just enough. I do feel like the season was more of a test run for this character than anything else. He doesn't have a whole lot to do, he's just kind of around for this season. But because I knew Quinn was going to be Deb's love interest in the future, I couldn't really buy into the whole Deb and Anton romance. I felt like this was more so just a storyline, so that way Deb had something to do as well, and it wouldn't actually amount to anything. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. The side characters in this season definitely took a bit of a hit, mostly because their case and what Dexter's doing aren't all that intertwined. So we see Miami Metro solve their case like a few episodes into the season, and then everyone just kind of stands around and bides their time until the end of the season. On the other side of things, we have Dexter's storyline. I like that in this season, we get to see Dexter actually setting up the kill rooms. In the previous 2 seasons, we would just see Dexter on the hunt, and then wake up when the victims do. But this season changed things up a bit. We got to see him scout locations for kill rooms, and even set them up. I actually said before we saw all this how long it must have taken him to set everything up, and I'm happy that they started showing that. The formula was kind of spent with getting victims on the table, but they weren't going to change this portion of the show, so they had to add more to it, and it made it feel fresh and new. They went away with the Harry flashbacks in this season in favor of having visions of Harry, mostly because they ran out of story to cover in the flashbacks, yet Original Sin is still getting a second season somehow. It's just always super obvious when there's a vision because the screen gets this really obnoxious filter over it. I don't really like this effect. I'm really glad that they eventually went away with it in season 5. But that's more of just a nitpick on my part. The back half of this season and Dexter getting married to Rita is really great. Finding out Miguel actually had connections to the Skinner was a nice surprise, but this mystery revolving around the Skinner's identity felt a little bit half-baked to me and really only here to try and give the two stories some sort of connection. So yeah, overall, not my favorite season. Not bad TV by any means, but definitely the weakest of the first 4 seasons. So I'm going 7.6 out of 10. So for season 4, I had really high hopes for this season because I know a lot of people say this is the best season of the show, and it truly is. However, I went into it with an equal amount of skepticism because of how I felt about season 3. But very quickly, those hesitations were unfounded because this is, and I'll say quite easily, the best season of Dexter across the entire franchise. This season feels just as personal as season 1 did because of the connections Dexter has with Arthur Mitchell. Now, Arthur Mitchell, otherwise known as the Trinity Killer, otherwise known as Lord Farquaad, otherwise known as Barney's dad, otherwise known as New Dumbledore, has truly changed the way I look at him in anything I see him in now because of this role. We see right at the start of the season that this guy is a killer, but for a while afterwards, he just does not seem like the same guy whatsoever. To the point I thought that maybe this guy has a twin, and Dexter's on the wrong trail, and that maybe there was somehow a switcheroo, and it really makes you think about John Lithgow differently. Maybe he wasn't around Barney all those years because he was doing the Trinity killings, I don't know. And it also makes you think differently about each and every person in your life. You never know what goes on behind closed doors, who people really are inside, and that's a very big theme of this season in general. I guessed early on that Arthur would be Dexter's true father. I know that they said back in season 1 that they already knew who Dexter's real dad was, but I figured that could have just been one of Rudy's games, and this season would be about the serial killer bloodline. Dexter being worried that his son would become just like him because Dexter and his father are both serial killers. And that is kind of the thematic through line, but Arthur isn't actually Dexter's father. Having Lundy return as a private investigator looking into the case is a great storyline. I actually didn't realize how much I liked Lundy until he came back in this season, and subsequently died. His death was necessary to show just how much of a threat Trinity is, the same way that Dokes' death was necessary to show us just how screwed but lucky Dexter was, and how Dexter himself is getting a little bit careless. It was around this point in the series that I started to realize something else about Dexter, and that's how sloppy he's getting with Harry's code. Throughout seasons 3 and 4, we see Dexter opening up to people, getting closer to his victims, and basically trying everything he can to incriminate himself. A few different thoughts ran through my head. Maybe the writers were just trying to increase the tension as the seasons went on. Maybe they just kind of forgot about Harry's code in order to make more intriguing scenes and scenarios. But what I'm choosing to believe, for the sake of this franchise and for the sake of Dexter's character arc in general, is that it's on purpose. Dexter himself is getting a little bit greedy. The thrill of the kill is no longer enough, and Dexter likes to get closer to some of his victims. He likes to learn more about them because it helps him learn more about himself, even if this can, and does, go against the code. Dexter continues disrespecting the code and taking more dangerous risks, and it's ultimately the reason why he's caught later on in the series. If you choose to view it with this lens, and maybe this is the proper lens to view it with, then it actually makes the story make a bit more sense towards the end. But in this season, these mistakes ultimately catch up to him. I haven't talked a whole lot about Rita because I wanted to save it for this season. Rita is, and I cannot understate this enough, too pure for this world. I kept on thinking about how the scene would play out when she finally found out the truth about Dexter and how heartbreaking that was going to be. She took him being a drug addict and the reason why her children's father was dead pretty well, but I had no clue how she would take the actual truth about Dexter. But honestly, I'm glad that Rita never found out. She didn't deserve to have her life absolutely crumble by finding out the truth. She obviously did not deserve to die, even a little bit, and this death hit me hard. I truly don't remember feeling this way about a character dying since something like The Red Wedding. But Rita was too good for this world, she was way too good for Dexter, and thinking about her death still makes me incredibly sad, so let's move on. A lot of the side character storylines are really great this season. A huge step up from season 3, where it felt like those stories were watered down or there just wasn't all that much for them to do. I really liked Angel and LaGuardia together. I thought that they had excellent chemistry. I even said something about how they should be together right before the reveal that they were already together. Deb and Quinn's dynamic continued to feel very obvious where it was headed, but I like how they butt heads but ultimately care for each other and have each other's backs. It's very simple, but it's nice. Deb going through Lundy's death makes this case very personal for her. To solve the case is also really great character development on her part, and for everybody in the department to really kind of rally behind her and want to solve this for her makes this work family really great and believable and likable. Masuka, I don't think I've talked about him yet. I love Masuka. He's the picture-perfect comic relief character who occasionally gets to shine on his own because of his smarts, and in this season we start to think of him as more than just the comic relief character because of how he's mistreated by the people around him, only for them to all rally behind him as well. At least I think that's this season. It was in fact not this season. Could be last season though. Like I said, I took all these notes retroactively. Don't kill me in the comments. Everything with Dexter and Rita and the kids works super well. Being part of the neighborhood watch and the kids growing up and starting to kind of resent Dexter a little bit really tests his character, but he ends up being a great father through all the turbulence. The neighbor and Rita I did not like whatsoever and was really happy when Dexter punched him in the face. But this whole aspect of the story goes back to what I was saying earlier. Dexter only shows his true self around his victims and the kids, but now that the kids are getting older, he's losing that side of himself a bit, because as they continue to grow, he's gonna have to start treating them like he treats everybody else. In so many ways, this season is like the end of Dexter Phase 1, a conclusion to Rita and the kids, a conclusion to some of the secrets Dexter had, like Rudy being his brother, and an end to Dexter really explicitly listening to Harry and his code. A big part of the show, and a big part of Dexter, dies right along with Rita, but I also think without her death, this season wouldn't be what it is. Arthur Mitchell as a villain wouldn't be remembered as who he is. If I'm scaling this season with the rest of the show and the franchise, then this season gets a 10 out of 10 because it's the best season of the show by far, but even without scaling it to other seasons, this season's like a 9.5 out of 10. One of the greatest seasons of television I've ever seen, although it is sad to know that Dexter never really reaches these highs ever again. I heard that the show takes a pretty steep decline after season 4, so again, I didn't go into this season with very high hopes, and maybe it's because of these lowered expectations that I ended up really liking this season. This season feels much darker with both its subject material and its graphic nature than any other season, both before and after this. I'm not going to get into what this season's primary case is about. I think most of you guys know, other than those watching this without having seen the show, but Deb talks about how things are hard to watch, and I felt exactly the same. If the other seasons of the show were Criminal Minds, this season is True Detective, if that makes sense to anyone. Despite how dark it is, I like the story of the season quite a bit and how related everything is to one another. Dexter, of course, always goes out and does his own private research on clients, but this season, both Dexter and the department are working on the same case in a closer manner than any of the seasons before this. And it's a difficult one because of how deeply rooted these crimes are, with some higher powers, and how far back the times and crimes go. But before I continue talking about the main story, let's talk about the first episode. The beginning of this season is absolutely heartbreaking. Seeing Dexter have to tell Cody and Aster about their mom is really hard to watch. And there was a lot asked from these child actors to perform these scenes, and I thought they both did a pretty great job. There's a scene where Aster and Cody leave with their grandparents and Cody wants to stay. That actually made me cry my eyes out. The combination of the kids growing up, losing their mother, and resenting Dexter because of it is really tragic and reinforces just how important Rita's death was. I was honestly hoping for some sort of flash forward to when the kids already knew this, like most other shows do, but in a lot of ways, I'm glad that they didn't do that because it made this episode stand out, and it places, again, more emphasis on Rita's death. I like how the season starts off with Dexter just going on a normal kill, just for it to end up being much deeper and eventful than he anticipated. This feels like a pretty obvious story thread to follow for this show in general, so they did it here, and it worked out really well. I also particularly like the dynamic between Dexter and Lumen. This friendship didn't raise the same amount of red flags as the Miguel and Dexter friendship did. I know things start off a bit rocky between them, but their trust eventually felt earned, and their chemistry together was really great. Now, I talked a bit earlier about how the show would use Dexter as an audience insert in the first season and how that was handled very well, whereas a lot of other times the show uses dramatic irony and how that was an issue with this season specifically. And that's because so much of the story and mystery is lost using dramatic irony. We find out almost immediately who's involved in the case and who the villains are. We even get specific point of view scenes that I feel like if they were just taken out, would have made for a much better season of television. We find out that Jordan Chase is behind everything pretty early on, but if all of his point of view scenes were taken out, he would have just given off the innocent vibe that could have worked in favor of the story. There's also a scene with the girls and the barrels being transported by, I believe it's Cole Harmon, but if this scene was taken out, it would have been great because Dexter was just there in the swamp, and the next day these barrels are displayed on the road after a car crash. The season just could have been a much better mystery than it is if all of these scenes were just excluded entirely, and I think it would have made for a much better story altogether. Of course, this is the season that Deb and Quinn end up getting together, but there's the additional layer of Quinn thinking Dexter is up to something and having Liddy investigate him. This makes the Quinn and Deb dynamic so much more interesting because of what he's hiding from her. And of course, Liddy actually gets a ton of dirt on Dexter and forces Dexter to think on his feet a number of times. And the whole conclusion to the story is expertly written. Quinn gets blamed for Liddy's death because the evidence is really against him, but it's Dexter who ends up bailing him out by fudging up the blood report because of what Quinn means to Deb. It's all these different story layers that come together and make for a great story, and I think this season ties everything together very nicely. Having Deb let both Dexter and Lumen go without knowing it's them shows just how impacted Deb was by the case this season, although I do think it would have been great if this is the moment where Deb would have found out about who Dexter really is. More on that in just a minute. Lumen leaving is really bittersweet because I liked her and Dexter. Not even romantically, I just liked their dynamic overall. But even Dexter realizes it's for the best. She has the closure to move on now, even though he doesn't and won't ever have that sort of closure. He realizes he can let her go. I really like this season. In fact, I probably have it higher ranked than the normal person. I'm gonna give it an 8.6 out of 10. The only thing is, what the hell ever happened to this babysitter? Season 6. People say that this show followed the same trajectory as Game of Thrones, and I more or less agreed with that until this season. Season 6 is still an excellent season of television for Game of Thrones, but I can't say the same for Season 6 of Dexter. A lot of the side characters and their stories are just not done well whatsoever. Namely, LaGuerta and Quinn. But I do like Deb being promoted over Batista and him accepting that and supporting her. I like that Masuka ends up with assistance, even if it's a bit strange at first. I do not like that LaGuerta and Batista get divorced off screen, and I overall just feel this season does LaGuerta really dirty because she was super political and just outright unlikable. And overall, I just don't even like the primary story of this season either. Dexter looking to try and find his faith in God and people who believe in God feels like a really strange storyline for him. He's said a number of times that he doesn't believe in God, and yeah, I like that he's rethinking things for his son, shows that he's trying to be a better father, but this theme ultimately doesn't lead anywhere for Dexter. There's no definitive change of heart that Dexter has. He doesn't believe or not believe in God any more or less, so it just seems like a story aspect that helps introduce Brother Sam and the main villain of the season, and that's it. Now, I do like Brother Sam, both as a character and as somebody that Dexter comes to care for. I think he has a very interesting but tragic arc throughout the first couple of episodes, and I ultimately think he was the main factor that made this storyline work, so without him in it, everything falls apart pretty quickly. Colin Hanks and Edward James Olmos are okay villains, I guess. I like the twist that Travis Marshall is really behind everything, even though Dexter had the opportunity to both kill him and work with him, but I just don't find him to be a particularly threatening villain. Maybe it's just because I don't really find Colin Hanks to be all that threatening, but this whole storyline just didn't work for me. It felt kind of like they were trying to do the same thing they did with Arthur Mitchell, but I think a large part of why that character worked was because of John Lithgow. Colin Hanks didn't really have any major roles at this point in his career. This was like a decade or so ago, so this honestly, to me, feels more like a Nepo baby hire than anything. Look, hey, we got Tom Hanks' son in our show, and I just don't really buy into this character or this performance at all. A lot of this season feels like it's set up for season 7, but also unnecessary setup for season 7. Deb gets promoted and ends up breaking up with Quinn because he proposed to her, but then they make Quinn become the ultimate douchebag asshole throughout the entire rest of the season. All he does is get super drunk, bring around some hot chick every now and then, and show up late for work. His character and LaGuardia's character were all but ruined this season. Now let's talk about the big thing that this season is known for, the reveal of Deb being in love with Dexter. I have a few conflicted feelings about this storyline. I actually don't think that it's super out of line for Deb's character. She's had one constant person in her life, and that's Dexter. She obviously has extreme daddy issues, but I think it's easy for her to confuse love with safety. So she thinks she's in love with Dexter. But ultimately, what this storyline is giving her and the audience an additional reason for her to not turn on Dexter when she finds out who he is at the end of the season. Except, I didn't need to see Deb in love with her brother to think she was gonna turn on him. I would have never thought that she would turn on him at all. I think the promotion adds just enough conflicting emotions for her. She wants to be a great leader and boss, and she can't do that while helping her serial killer brother. I don't think that she needed to be in love with him. And with this storyline coming fresh off the actors getting divorced in real life, I just don't really know. That doesn't feel good to me. But what I ultimately don't like about this season is how it's not truly needed. I don't like how they treated a lot of the side characters. I don't think all of the Deb stuff is necessary. I don't really think this story of the season overall adds anything. I think if Deb were to just have found out about Dexter at the end of season 5, you could literally go right from there to the start of season 7. Get rid of all the stupid stuff they did with the side characters, and the story still makes complete sense. I mean, it doesn't with how they handled Quinn and Deb and Angel and LaGuardia. You miss out on Masuka's student, who has a semi-big role in season 7. Angel's sister, Deb's promotion. Okay, so some stuff does happen in season 6, but I don't think the majority of it is needed or wanted, so it could have just went from seasons 5 to 7, a few changes here and there, and I think it would have been much better. Season 6 is definitely the worst season of the show so far, and I can't go any higher than like a 6.5 out of 10. So it's reasons like this that I like being able to just binge the entire series, because I've heard nothing but how bad the later seasons of Dexter are, but when you binge a series you don't know a lot about, you don't come into it with any preconceived notions, and because of that, I think that Dexter Season 7 is a phenomenal season of television. This is the most different season of the show for one reason, and that's the new dynamic of Deb and Dexter. I feel like this reveal was a season too late. It almost felt like they were purposefully keeping this reveal away from the audience, but now that it's here, it did not disappoint. The whole Deb and Dexter dynamic this season is great. Her figuring him out and forcing him to confess everything, and him basically crashing her entire world down by explaining that he's the Bay Harbor Butcher, he's been taking cases from Miami Metro and dealing with them himself, he has a code that their father taught him. Everything about Deb's reality was just false, and for that reason, Jennifer Carpenter gives an all-time great performance in this season specifically.
I am the worst fucking detective in the world.
Here's something that I feel is going to be a pretty polarizing or unpopular opinion, but I like Hannah. I like this actress a lot. I'm going to absolutely butcher her name, Yvonne Strahovski, but I've seen her in a number of things like Chuck, The Handmaid's Tale, The Tomorrow War, so to see her in Dexter, I was all for it, and I actually think that she complements Dexter really well and works the best out of all of his love interests. There's no doubt that Rita is better, and I absolutely love and adore Rita, but Dexter and Hannah deserve each other. Rita deserved better than Dexter. In a weird way, I feel like Hannah is Harley Quinn to Dexter's Joker, and for her to actually be a killer and truly understand Dexter, I feel like their love makes a whole lot of sense because Dexter can truly be himself and speak the truth around her. There was a moment where Deb called Dexter and basically finally understood why he does what he does and tells him to kill Hannah. But Dexter has basically already fallen for Hannah, and this scene made me go, okay, yeah, this is a great season. That conflict of being put at odds after Deb finally accepts Dexter and it's the one person he doesn't want to kill makes for such a great story throughout the season. Especially because Dexter eventually does choose Deb over Hannah, just not in the way that Deb thinks she wants. I'm still not totally on board with the whole Deb being in love with Dexter thing, but I think that even the writers must have known it wasn't really working, because in the episode after Deb confesses her love for Dexter, he says it's easy to rationalize because he's always been there, and it's kind of just written off after that. I mean, I'm glad that they addressed it and that it ultimately didn't go anywhere, because I think that's for the best. The side storylines of the season are also equally intriguing to me. I like how Dexter's impulses land him in a world of hurt with the mobsters, and Ray Stevenson as Isaac is a really great and unique side villain. I love that as the season goes on, we learn more about him, how he and Dexter come to see eye to eye, but I do think his storyline was cut loose a little too soon. The season also does its best to fix the mistakes of the last season, more specifically, the mistakes made with both Quinn and LaGuerta. Quinn falling for the stripper is another good storyline. I don't really buy the relationship itself, but with Quinn being known as a dirty cop and being tempted by all this money and power and eventually sticking by his morals, even if they're bent a little bit, is a great storyline for Quinn's character, and I'm glad that they actually gave him something to do in this season other than just being drunk and heartbroken. LaGuerta being close on the tail of Dexter makes for some really suspenseful moments, especially towards the end of the season when she confronts Deb about the security camera footage. LaGuerta comes across as crazy and Dexter has to worm his way out of everything, again letting his impulses put him in a place of danger. To end the season with Deb having to choose between Dexter or LaGuerta, really heartbreaking, and when she shoots LaGuerta just to run over to her in regret is another really powerful moment in the series thanks to Jennifer Carpenter. So I'm not sure if this is unpopular or not, but season 7 is up there with one of the greatest seasons of the show for me. I'm going 8.7 out of 10, completely surprised by this season, and I don't really care who disagrees. The curse of Season 8 strikes again. Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, a number of sitcoms, and now Dexter. However, it took a little bit into the season for me to actually see the reasons why it was bad. I actually think about 60% of this season is pretty good. Or at least on paper it's pretty good. What's actually good in this season, I'll give more like 30 to 40%. The reveal at the end of the first episode that Dr. Vogel knows about Dexter and his code is a really great reveal that I didn't see coming. Revealing that this woman is sort of responsible for who Dexter is and that Harry turned to her for counseling, I think wraps up the whole "just get Dexter therapy" line of thinking, but I ultimately think this is an idea that works better on paper. There being a secret other person who was pulling the strings behind the curtain is obviously a big trope, and I think that's what was attempted here, just for this to turn into another mommy issues storyline for Dexter. Now let's talk about Harry. Harry is an incredibly misunderstood character. A lot of people take Harry to be this guy in Dexter's visions, but that's not who Harry is. Harry made Dexter who he is, yes, but he quite literally couldn't live with himself after seeing what Dexter had become, to the point that he offed himself. He reminds me of Dumbledore, strangely enough, this person that everybody looked to for all the answers and as the ultimate person who knew everything. But the more you learn about him, the more you're like, oh, you're just a guy. You're not some god who has all the answers after all. So for a while, I think this storyline between them is pretty good. Dexter getting to learn more about his own backstory through Dr. Vogel and her enlisting his help because if the police got involved in this brain surgeon situation, they would probably arrest her for what she's done over the years. It's a pretty intriguing mystery, and yes, this season is also a mystery. This season, in a lot of ways, goes back to that same kind of structure as season 1 and lets the mystery run its course through the season. The fact that they think they have the brain surgeon just to actually not have him is again another great twist. But that's where the good stuff kind of comes to an end for this storyline. Now let's talk about Deb. For a little bit into the season, I was not into the storyline they gave her, even if it does make complete sense. Killing LaGuardia and having her entire world shattered with Dexter's reveal last season would probably send anybody into this kind of downward spiral, and while I like the idea of this whole storyline on paper, there's just something about its execution that doesn't really do it for me. Even when she gets rehabilitated by Dr. Vogel and then accepts Dexter, but then doesn't and tries to kill him, but then accepts him again, something about the flow of this entire story arc doesn't work for me. By the end of it, I was still unsure if Deb was really alright or if she was going to snap at any second. I'm not too sure if this is a compliment to Jennifer Carpenter's acting or a jab at the writers for their execution of this storyline. Let's say it's some sort of combination of the two. One thing you can always count on is for Michael C. Hall to knock it out of the park playing Dexter. While there's some choices that Dexter makes in this season that I really don't feel like he would make, Michael C. Hall is always great to watch, and I think that's why Dexter in this franchise has lasted this long. There are a lot of side stories in this final season that basically end up going nowhere by the end of it. Batista has come out of retirement because Deb quits and LaGuardia's dead, so even though he got a happy ending and his restaurant at the end of the last season, well, now he's back to work. What does he do at work? Well, he tries to help Quinn grow up and make him take some responsibility by taking the sergeant's test, only to give that job to some character that is supposedly a main side character, but she was never once properly introduced, and once she gets this job, we never see her again. So that feels a little bit odd. It really seems like Angel had basically nothing to do. Don't get me wrong, I love Angel, I'm glad he's here. I'd say that they should have given him a proper storyline, but that's what they did with Masuka. Apparently, he has a daughter. And that's his storyline. Doesn't get connected to anything in any major way. There's no resolution. She's kinda just there. Masuka gets zero resolution as a character whatsoever. You ready to see his final scene in the show?
Yeah, Dex. She's gonna pull through.
Yep, that's it. That's the last time we see Masuka, even still to this day. They basically gave him a daughter, so that way he has a reason to be on screen, but when that was over, there was no need to include him in anything. Now let's talk about Quinn and Jamie. They gave Jamie an increased role this season by being Quinn's love interest, and that's all well and good, but Quinn just really can't get over Deb. And I don't think that in itself is a bad thing. I like Quinn and Deb together. I'm not mad that they were getting back together. But why even have Quinn and Jamie get together in the first place if he's just gonna leave her for Deb? Just to involve Angel some more into this storyline, I guess? Jamie talks about this job offer she gets in Atlanta and how she's not gonna take it because she's with Quinn in Miami. If he was gonna break up with her, this should have been the main reason, not Deb. But Jamie is another character that we get zero resolution for. She's kind of just here to babysit Harrison, and that's it. If this was going to be the case the entire time, they should have just kept that first babysitter from season 5. Deb gets a new job as a private investigator, and her boss, Elway, seems like a cool dude at first, but then he gets feelings for Deb, she rejects him, so he has this extremely personal vendetta against her, Dexter, and Hannah. He even gets the upper hand on Hannah, just for her to tranquilize him, and we never see him again. Oh yeah, Hannah's back, which, again, I don't really mind, because I think that she compliments Dexter very well, but for whatever reason, I guess Deb is now thinking that way too. They try to have these moments of bonding between them, but I really feel like at some point, Deb was gonna try to kill Hannah, but that seemingly never even crosses her mind. Hannah just ends up taking care of Harrison. She's more so just brought back in this season because it was left open-ended last season, but no other reason. These are all just the side character arcs. I'll start in on Deb and Dexter in a minute. Like I said, I didn't really mind the start to the whole Dr. Vogel storyline. I think it adds an interesting dynamic to the storyline, fleshes out more of Dexter's backstory with Harry, and adds a nice mystery element. This all culminates in the episode, Are We There Yet? Dexter takes on one of Vogel's clients as an apprentice, and this kid is funny, charming, trying to be smart, and adds something new to the show with an apprentice figure that the first season of the show also tried to do, but it wasn't explored totally, and I thought this was another pretty good storyline. 8 episodes into the season. I thought there were definitely some issues. The editing of this season is really weird. Scenes start and end inorganically. Character choices felt a bit weird, but the season didn't seem to be on par with the other bad season 8s of shows. But after this episode, it all goes downhill. Zach is killed by the actual brain surgeon, who is still out there, a final great and really tragic twist. But after learning he was out there, it was incredibly obvious who the killer was. Dexter's next door neighbor was murdered and Zach was trying to be framed for it. Vogel had a family, but they all died. One of the sons in a fire and the body was never recovered. Here's a picture. Wow, it looks just like that neighbor girl's boyfriend. But surely Miami Metro would have ruled him out as a suspect by this point, right? Nope. Apparently not, and it's Dexter who has to figure it all out and then tell Deb to tell Quinn that it's all connected. I swear to God, sometimes this show makes me feel like I could be a detective at Miami Metro. And this is honestly true for the whole show. There are some times where I feel like the police haven't figured something out yet because Dexter hasn't figured it out yet. It's like the writers are waiting for Dexter to figure it out so that way it can trickle down, but sometimes it makes all of these people look incredibly stupid. So then we're introduced to the final big bad of the series, the brain surgeon, aka Vogel's actual son. I think this guy is far and away the worst villain in the show. I don't know who this actor is, but in all of his scenes, especially the ones where he is the brain surgeon, it just feels like he's acting. In the final episode, he tried to do his best Hannibal Lecter impression, and it just came off as laughably bad. And for him to be the accidental cause of Deb's death feels very much like they were trying to recapture that same gravitas that John Lithgow brought as Arthur Mitchell, but it just failed entirely. He kills Vogel because she's a complete idiot and made it super obvious that something bad was going to happen. I actually liked this character, but I felt nothing by her death because she brought it on herself. I really feel like the last episode of the show is a prank. Deb gets shot, but she pulls through and all seems like it's going to be okay. But actually, something went wrong, and now her brain is mush, and she's basically worse than dead. All this happens out of absolutely nowhere, and sometimes when I hear people complain about a character's death and how it happens, I'm like, no, you're just mad that the character died, but get over it. But Deb's death is maybe the most idiotically written death I've ever seen. And here's why I think that. The message of Deb's death is supposed to be that Dexter is the person who caused this. It's his fault that her life became the way it is. He was at fault for it. He drops her off in the ocean as his final victim because it's all very symbolic. Deb represented all the good and hope in Dexter's life, and without her, he couldn't become the person he needed to be. I understand all of that. But Deb's death isn't even Dexter's fault. Could he have killed the guy and Deb wouldn't have been shot? Sure, but she went to surgery, everything was fine, but then a few minutes later, no, there were actually complications. The doctor screwed up. Are you serious? If they wanted Deb's death to be on Dexter, then she really should have just died from the gunshot immediately. But for everything to be all nice and dandy one minute to absolute tragedy the next minute because of complications with the surgery, just doesn't scream Dexter's fault to me. Justice for Deb, this is a terrible death. Now let's talk about Dexter himself, because this final episode really made me think I was watching the show wrong. The entire premise of the show is about a serial killer that you can actually root for. So why does the final episode make me feel bad for wanting to root for Dexter? This entire season was setting up how Dexter can be both a serial killer and a person who cares deeply for others. The past 5 seasons have all been about how Dexter doesn't want to give his son the life he has, that he wants to be a good father and actually be there for his son. Dr. Vogel is really surprised by Dexter's ability to care for Deb, Hannah, and Harrison. Dexter has one final, actually really great scene with Harry about how he doesn't need him anymore. If Dexter was able to actually fulfill all these wishes and move on and be happy, that's a pretty great message to the audience watching. You might have some dark times and dark thoughts, but you can move past all of this and be happy and choose to be a better person than the people around you. Influence others to be better than you were in the past. But nope, I guess the message of this show is that if you've done bad things in the past, then you should just give up on everybody around you and go become a lumberjack in the wilderness. Am I saying that Dexter deserved a true and happy ending with no consequences? No, absolutely not. He did put Deb through hell. He made some sloppy and careless decisions over the course of the series that got many people he cared about killed. But for Dexter's entire character arc to be changed in the final episode of the series is somehow worse than Jaime Lannister's character arc. 5 seasons worth of Dexter wanting to become a good father and be there for his child, well, that's all gone because the doctors botched Deb's surgery. You see how ridiculous that sounds? And for Dexter to drop Deb in the middle of the ocean like all of his other horrible victims is truly just a slap in the face to Deb. Give her a proper funeral. If Deb knew that Dexter was going to drop her in the ocean and abandon his son, she would have gotten out of that coma and kicked his ass. I think the worst part about Season 8 is how it doesn't even feel like a final season. The storyline tries to feel more personal by involving Dr. Vogel and having her have a connection with Harry and acting as Dexter's mom, but it's not as personal as Dexter's own actual brother in Season 1, and it doesn't feel as impactful as even a complete stranger like Arthur Mitchell in Season 4. I figured for sure this final season was going to be about Dexter's crimes all coming to the surface and biting him in the ass. Maybe Dexter's on the run and Deb is either with him or trying to help him escape from the inside, or maybe even against him. But nope, the series ends with nobody figuring out who Dexter was, just a quick scene of Angel figuring out Dexter's boat was in the wreckage. No scene where the department honors Deb and Dexter, no one asking where the fuck Harrison is or if he's okay, no resolution to any of the side characters, no answer as to how Dexter even survived when we see his boat in the hurricane. This was just not a final season of the show. This season, the same as Season 6, just feels pointless. If Dexter was going to go and be a recluse somewhere, if that's the ending they wanted to go with, then LaGuerta should have just been proven correct in Season 7, and then he leaves in that season. Or have Season 8 be the manhunt for Dexter, because this, outside of the final episode, doesn't feel like a final season, and that's almost the worst comment you can make about any final season. I said about 30 to 40% of this season was good, so I'll give this season a 3.5 out of 10. And even that is pretty generous. At the time I'm writing this, haven't seen New Blood yet, so I'm just going to make a really bold prediction here and say that the last episode of this show is going to have some twisted events or retcons, because without it, they're fighting an extremely uphill battle. So, my predictions didn't come true. I had hoped for like 30 seconds when Deb walked into frame, only to realize that she was now going to be Dexter's vision. So, still very disappointed that Deb is dead and that nothing was retconned, but I'm at least glad that Deb does have a pretty major role in this season. So Dexter New Blood feels very different in all kinds of ways. It's shot very different from the original show, looks far more cinematic than anything we've seen previously. It's honestly kind of jarring going from watching Dexter right over to New Blood because of how different it looks. So for those that still don't know, Dexter New Blood follows Dexter years after the events of the main show. He now goes by the alias Jim Lindsay, a nice nod to the author Jeff Lindsay. He has completely shed his dark passenger for the past 10 years, and he just lives in a small town in upstate New York as your average guy. Things get shaken up when Dexter's son Harrison, yep, the one that he abandoned, comes into town to reunite with his father, and the show follows their strange, rocky relationship, along with some other strange things going on in town. Not that kind of strange things, the more serial killer type strange. There were two things that I was really looking forward to going into the show, outside of some answers for Dexter's actions in the final episode. But number one was the setting. I'm always a fan of these snowy, small town settings, mostly because I grew up in a place that's pretty similar to this, and seeing Dexter in this setting offers up something totally different from the setting of Miami. And number two, I was looking forward to the advancement of technology and how that was going to factor into Dexter's lifestyle. For number one, the setting is obviously completely different from Miami, but in a ton of ways. Small town vibes, everybody knows everyone, no ocean to dispose of bodies, snow covering the ground that would plainly show footprints and blood, and the show takes full advantage of all these opportunities. For number two, the technology was one of the primary aspects of this season. We see very quickly that the internet and social media play a big factor, as do Ring cameras, drones, hunting cameras, and this was something in the old show that really dates it. Because of how tech-reliant our world is now, and how connected we all are to screens and cameras, it makes the things that Dexter does in the old show far from believable in our world today. But this show addressed all of this, and the setting even helps with this quite a bit. While the world is so filled with screens and cameras now, being in the middle of nowhere is really used to Dexter's advantage. He could absolutely not get away with anything he does in this show if it was still set in Miami. But very quickly, I thought this show went with the obvious direction of Harrison inheriting the Dark Passenger because he was also born in blood, and I had some mixed reactions on this at first, but I also think with how the overall story was handled, it was done well. This was now the third time that they were venturing down the path of Dexter being a mentor to a young person, although this time it's handled a bit differently and it feels more personal because Harrison is obviously Dexter's son. Like most seasons of Dexter, this season tells a pretty self-contained story. The town is small, but it's also home to 2.5 serial killers, and for that reason, it's much harder for anybody to get away with anything. Harrison, being the person who comes in between both of the killers, is also a really great plot device as Dexter learns to cope with being a father and trying to be a good father, while also being both ashamed and happy that Harrison has inherited this dark passenger. The show, of course, introduces a number of new side characters, like Harrison, but Chief Bishop, aka Dexter's new girlfriend, the Sergeant, who's also Harrison's coach, and most notably, Clancy Brown as Kurt Caldwell, the antagonist of the season. There's also this billionaire in town. He seems creepy. I wonder how he's gonna factor into everything. Oh, he's not gonna be seen again? Alright, cool. Dexter's girlfriend being the one that figures everything out about Dexter makes the Miami Metro Department feel entirely inept at their jobs, but I also chalk this up to the advancement of technology and also the help of Angel Batista, who I don't believe for a second would not remember Harrison's name. When Dexter and Harrison finally have their whole truthful conversation, Harrison keeps on bringing up the fact that the reason why Dexter does what he does is to make the world a better place. And Dexter is kind of like, sure. And that keeps getting brought up until Dexter really does kind of make some decisions that prove he's too far gone, and this is no longer about keeping the world safe. It's just about feeding his own obsession. An obsession that's been dormant for 10 years and is now just being used as a way for Dexter to get away from any and all trouble. And that brings me to the ending, which I know a lot of people have a problem with. It's just as lowly rated as the actual finale of the proper show, but I gotta admit, I didn't really feel like that with this ending. With Dexter abandoning Harrison at the end of the proper series, and basically every person around him dying being his fault, I really feel like Harrison being the one to kill Dexter actually brings things full circle. However, I do think all of this happens incredibly fast. Dexter goes from, come on, we gotta get out of here, I'll leave you here if I have to actually, it's okay, I deserve death, you can kill me, in like 30 seconds. I don't really buy that whole transition. I mean, sure, it makes sense on paper, and it makes sense to the audience who's been going through this for years, but it doesn't make sense for Dexter, and that's my main issue with it. But apparently I'm in the minority for people who thought this ending worked, and the majority of you guys got your wish, because somehow Dexter isn't dead. So in terms of spin-off shows that continue the main story, New Blood did a pretty good job. The show had a lot of uphill battles in front of it, and instead of retconning the ending of the previous show, they had to move on and try to tell the story as it stood. And in doing that, they kinda had to make Dexter the villain in the end. He had to either continue running or see that he was wrong, and how over the years he had completely abandoned Harry's code and was instead very selfish in his actions. So that's what they did in the span of about 30 seconds. They finally made Dexter answer for his wrongdoings over the years. They had Harrison kill him off. Except this show is way too popular, so actually never mind, Dexter is alive once again. So Dexter New Blood gets a solid 8 rating. Now we have Original Sin, which is the newest series in the Dexter timeline, chronicling Dexter's rise into the prolific serial killer that he would become, and reintroducing younger versions of the characters we all know and love. Now, if you know me and have seen videos on this channel before, then you'll know I'm not a big prequel guy. I find most prequels to be a little bit redundant, oftentimes adding more story where story doesn't need to be told, introducing new characters that don't show up later or aren't even mentioned, so they clearly aren't that important, changing or retconning bits of lore that change the way the actual story is looked at or perceived, and prequels are generally made for one reason, and one reason only.
Money!
Dexter Original Sin basically covers each and every reason I just stated as to why I don't like prequels. I mentioned back in the portion on seasons 1 and 2, but we see each and every big moment from Dexter and Harry's dynamic in the flashbacks. This show just does them all again, adding a bit more context with new actors, so this show was a really hard sell to me, but it was formatted a bit differently because all of this was basically Dexter's life flashing before his eyes as he's brought to the hospital after Harrison shot him. So if you want to watch this whole franchise in chronological order, don't start with Dexter Original Sin, you're gonna be really confused. Except, this show doesn't really follow this format very strictly. The show was written as its own thing, and then bridging it between New Blood and Resurrection really feels like an afterthought. Now I know I usually get a lot of flack for talking bad about prequels, so I do have to give credit to all of the actors, both the new ones that aren't mentioned again, like Sarah Michelle Gellar as Tanya Martin, and Patrick Dempsey as, definitely not the bad guy, Captain Aaron Spencer. But each and every one of the younger actors, I think over the course of the season, nailed their roles. It took a few episodes for me to really buy into everything. At first, it really seemed like everybody was just doing their best impression of the original actors, And I mean, with this sort of show, that is kind of all they have to do. But I think as the season went on, I started to see everything less as an impression and more so just the characters themselves. That might just be a me thing, maybe people bought it immediately, maybe you never bought it, but that's the risk that's associated with this type of show and this type of prequel. The real draw of the show is seeing Dexter's rise, from how sloppy his first kill is to how refined things get as everything goes on. But of course, this show tells an original story, with somebody taking the kids of elected officials, and this, of course, shows how Dexter cares more for children than he does anyone else. So this season is more of a mystery, except it's a pretty obvious mystery. Patrick Dempsey plays this captain that we've never heard of before, seems to fit the bill of every murder, has the right motivation for it, and surprise, surprise, he's the villain. So it seems this department has a history of hiring murderers. First this guy, and then the infamous Bay Harbor Butcher, James Dokes. There's another B-plot with Harry uncovering more about the backstory of Dexter's mother and brother, and some more about Brian and how he continued following Dexter throughout the years. This is a pretty cool aspect of the show, but also where the whole bridging the gap between New Blood and Resurrection thing falls apart entirely. So overall, I think the show was fine all around. Was it needed? No, absolutely not. But for a prequel where nothing actually was needed in the first place, I thought they did a good job. So I know a lot of people like this show, maybe you'll find this rating a bit low, but I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. Alright, if you made it this far, thank you for watching everything. If you're just skipping to this part to see my ratings, then welcome. Coming in last place is Dexter Season 8. The Season 8 curse took another one. The story was just alright over the course of the season, and the ending might actually take the cake as the worst ending in the history of TV shows for me. Above Game of Thrones, above How I Met Your Mother, definitely above Lost, because that ending isn't bad, but that's a discussion for another time. So yeah, Dexter Season 8 will never be watching this season ever again. In 9th place is Dexter Season 6. Like I said, this was a pretty redundant season. It butchered a lot of the side characters, had a very weak villain, and the central Dexter storyline about his faith just didn't really do much for me or Dexter whatsoever. So yeah, easy 9th place because it's just slightly above Season 8. Coming in 8th place, this might shock some people, but it's Season 3. Again, a pretty weak storyline, incredibly obvious where the whole Miguel Prado thing was going, and for how good the rest of the first 4 seasons are, this one sticks out like a sore thumb. Coming in 7th place is Original Sin. I just listed all my gripes with prequels, so there's all of that and that whole factor. But then there's the really obvious mystery and twist with the captain being the killer, and the whole B-plot with Harry and Brian that just doesn't make any sense if this is Dexter's memory, but overall, pretty great final product for a prequel. Coming in 6th place is New Blood. I might have this higher than some people because of their hatred for the ending, and like I said, I can see where people are coming from with that, but I actually didn't hate this ending nearly as much as I hated Season 8's ending. Everything happened a little fast, sure, but the overall product of this show I still think is worth it, different enough from the main show, and I enjoyed it. In 5th place is Season 5, the darkest season of Dexter, and a pretty great follow-up to the powerhouse of a season that was Season 4. Again, I think some of the writing and structure of this season makes it a worse season overall, but still a great season overall. In 4th place, Season 7. After everything I heard about the final seasons of Dexter being awful, I find it really funny that Season 7 is sandwiched between the 2 worst seasons of the series. I'm not sure if this is an unpopular placement for this season, but I loved the dynamic between Deb and Dexter this season. For that reason, this feels the most different out of all of the original Dexter seasons, and this season just blew my expectations out of the water. What can I say? In 3rd place, Season 2. The story got bigger, the stakes were higher, the Dokes and Dexter scenes were all fantastic, Lundy coming in, and the daddy issues and mommy issues. Don't have much more to say, so yeah, 3rd place. In 2nd place, Season 1, a season and story that kicked everything off in a major way, with a character that the story continues to bring back time and time again because no other killer or villain in the series was this personal to Dexter. It was like I said, hindsight is 2020, and I bet they wish to keep this villain for later on in the series. And at number 1, we of course have Season 4. John Lithgow as Arthur Mitchell. That's really all I need to say. This season was the end of the first phase of Dexter, and the show has been chasing this high ever since. Alright, that's everything in the Dexter universe so far. Of course, up next, there's Dexter Resurrection. There's not a whole ton of information out there, other than it has like the most stacked cast ever. But if you like this video, want to see more on Dexter, like a Resurrection video when it comes out, or even like a theory video before it, let me know that by liking the video, subscribing for more stuff like this. I'd really appreciate it. Special thanks to all my channel members. You guys are the best. And I'll see you all in the next one.